It was the last Thursday of April. My mom had cooked her usual pork chops, rice, and that green bean casserole nobody actually liked, but nobody had the courage to say so. My dad sat at the head of the table the way he always did, napkin tucked into his collar, already halfway through his second beer. The kitchen smelled like something burning slightly on the stove. Mom always forgot about the rolls, and the overhead light buzzed the way it had been buzzing for 3 months because nobody had gotten around to replacing the bulb. David was telling a story. He does that. My brother always has a story, and it always starts the same way, with him at the center of something impressive and everyone else on the edges watching. So, I closed the deal right there in the parking lot, he said, cutting into his pork chop with both hands like he was performing surgery. Biggest quarter the company's had in 2 years. Marcus actually pulled me aside after and said I might be up for a promotion. My dad's face lit up the way it only does for David, that specific glow, like someone had turned a lamp on behind his eyes. That's my boy, Dad said. He actually said that out loud. At 37 years old, Mom smiled and squeezed David's arm. We're so proud of you, honey. I was sitting across from them, stirring rice into my mashed potatoes, quiet, the way I'd been quiet at these dinners for years. It wasn't that I was upset. I'd stopped being upset about this a long time ago. It was more like watching a show you've already seen the ending to. You know every line, every beat. You just sit there and let it play. David turned to me with the expression he always wears when he remembers I exist. Not mean exactly, more like polite. The way you'd acknowledge a piece of furniture that had suddenly become slightly inconvenient. How's the tech thing going? He asked. My dad looked up from his plate. He didn't say anything, but his eyebrows did something, a small lift. The kind of lift that says, yeah, how is that going? Fine, I said. It's going fine. You still at that startup? Dad asked. He said startup the way some people say hobby. It's not really a startup anymore, I said. And then I stopped because I'd learned over years of dinners exactly like this one that the more I explained, the less anyone listened. So I just let the sentence end there, hanging in the air like a thread nobody was going to pull. Dad said he picked up his beer. Well, David's the businessman in the family, I guess. He laughed at his own joke. Mom laughed too. I smiled. I took a bite of rice. I let the moment pass the way I always let them pass. David, emboldened, kept going. Actually, I've been thinking about getting a place, a real place. Something with a yard, maybe. Dad, you know that house on Elm Street? The one next to your buddy Tom? Oh, that one's gorgeous, Dad said, leaning forward now. 3 bedrooms. Good neighborhood. You should look into it. I think I'm going to, David said. He looked at me casually. The way you look at someone when you're about to say something that you don't think will land badly. I mean, at least someone in this family is settling down, right? Mom nodded. He's right, sweetheart. When are you going to think about that? A house, stability, those things matter. When are you going to get a real job, Sarah? Dad said, still half laughing. A job people have actually heard of. He wasn't being cruel. That was the thing that made it hard. He genuinely believed what he was saying. In his mind, a job people had heard of meant something like where he worked. Harwood and Associates, a mid-tier consulting firm with 43 employees and a website that looked like it was built in 2009. But it was steady, it was safe, paid a pension, and in my father's world, that was the definition of success. I nodded. Maybe someday, I said, and I meant it as a joke. But nobody laughed. We finished dinner, Mom cleared the plates, Dad turned on the television, David checked his phone and said he had to get going. He and his girlfriend were meeting friends for drinks. He hugged Mom, clapped Dad on the shoulder, and waved at me on his way out the door. Drive safe, I said. Yeah, he said, and he was gone. I helped Mom with the dishes without being asked. We stood side by side at the sink, her washing, me drying, the way we'd done it 100 times before. She didn't say anything for a while, then softly, without looking at me. He means well. You know your father. I know, I said. And I did know. That was never the question. That was the last Thursday of April. 5 months later, everything my father believed about me, about what I was worth, what I had built, would be demolished in a single afternoon. Not by me, not by anything I said or did, simply by him walking through a door. My name is Sarah Chin. I am 34 years old. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment on Maple Street with a couch I bought at a thrift store and a coffee maker that's older than my nephew. I drive a 2018 Honda Civic with 94,000 miles on it. The paint on the back bumper is chipping. When people ask me what I do for work, I say I work in tech. And then I wait for them to lose interest, which usually takes about 4 seconds. They always lose interest because that's what I want them to do. The truth I have not shared with my family in any meaningful way for the better part of 6 years is this. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Meridian Tech. Meridian is a business-to-business enterprise software platform. We build the kind of tools that large companies use to manage their data, their workflows, their entire operational infrastructure. We have 280 employees across 3 offices. We were valued at $340 million at our last funding round. We bring in $87 million in annual revenue. Last year, TechCrunch featured us in a roundup of the fastest-growing enterprise platforms in the country. We have clients in 17 states. 3 of them are Fortune 500 companies. I built it from nothing. From a laptop in a coffee shop in 2017 when I was 26 years old and had $4,200 in my bank account. I coded the first version of the platform myself. Every line, every function, every interface. I pitched investors while wearing the same blazer I'd bought at a consignment shop for $23. I worked 16-hour days for 2 years straight. I ate ramen for dinner 4 nights a week. I missed birthdays, missed holidays, missed a funeral for my college roommate's father because I had a pitch meeting I couldn't reschedule, and I told almost no one. Not because I was ashamed, not because I didn't want to share it. I told no one because early on, back in 2019, when Meridian was still small but already profitable, when we had just closed our first real contract, and I was sitting on something that I knew in my gut was going to be significant. I tried. I sat my parents down at this exact kitchen table, the same one where David tells his stories, and I said, "Mom, Dad, I think the company is going to make it. I think it's actually going to be big." I remember the exact way I said it, carefully, with hope. The way you say something when you've been holding it close to your chest for a long time and you're finally letting it out. My dad looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "That's nice, sweetheart." David just got promoted, by the way. My mom nodded enthusiastically. He's going to be a regional director by next year. Isn't that exciting? I sat there for about 5 seconds, and something in me just closed. Not dramatically, not with anger. It was quieter than that. It was more like a door gently shutting. I smiled, said, "That's great for David," and finished my dinner. After that, I stopped trying to explain. When they asked what I did, I gave them just enough to satisfy the question without giving them anything real. I work in tech, I do some software stuff, it's pretty boring, honestly, and they never pushed, they never asked a single follow-up question. Not once, not in 6 years, not a single, "Oh, what kind of software?" or "How many people work there?" or "Are you doing well?" The concealment wasn't hard. It was almost natural by that point. What was harder was the money. My family had been coming to me for cash for as long as I could remember, and I had been saying yes for almost as long. Not because they asked nicely, not because the requests made sense, but because I felt guilty. Because somewhere underneath all of it, I still believed that if I was generous enough, if I gave enough, if I was useful enough in the one way they seemed to notice, maybe they'd see me. Not just as the quiet one, not just as the one who didn't matter, but as someone real. My dad's car needed a new transmission in 2021. $3,400. I paid it anonymously, told Mom it was a gift from a friend. Dad never questioned it. Why would he? In his mind, Sarah couldn't possibly be the source. She worked some vague tech job that probably paid barely above minimum wage. My brother needed $1,200 for a security deposit when he moved out of Mom and Dad's house. I Venmo'd it to him on a Tuesday afternoon. He texted back, "Thanks. When are you free this week? Mom wants to do dinner." Not a word about the money, not a question about where it came from. My mom asked for $800 for a dental bill that insurance didn't cover. I sent it within the hour. She called to thank me and spent 11 minutes telling me about David's new car, a used Audi he'd financed through a dealership. "Isn't it beautiful?" she said. "He looks so put together." I don't say this to make them sound like villains. They aren't villains, they're just people who never saw me as someone who mattered. And when you don't see someone as someone who matters, you don't notice what they give you. You just take it. You don't ask where it came from. You don't wonder how they can afford it. You just accept it and move on. By April of this year, I had quietly sent my family a little over $14,000 in the past 18 months alone. Not a single one of them knew where the money was coming from. Not a single one of them had ever asked. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. It came on a Wednesday in early May, 3 days after that dinner. My dad called me at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was in the middle of a board meeting, the real kind, with investors on the line and quarterly projections on the screen, and my CFO walking through a slide deck that would determine our expansion budget for the next fiscal year. So, I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 2:14. I silenced it. He called a third time at 2:31. And this time, he left a message. "Sarah, it's Dad. Listen, I need a favor. My credit card got declined at the gas station. Long story, don't worry about it, but I need about $600 to cover it. Just send it to my account, okay? Mom will handle the details. Thanks. Bye." He didn't say please. He didn't ask if I could afford it. He didn't say thank you in any real way. He just said it the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. Casual, unremarkable, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I listened to the voicemail sitting in my office. My actual office, the one with my name on the door and a view of the city skyline, and a framed Forbes mention on the wall from 2022, and a whiteboard covered in product roadmap notes. I listened to it once. Then I put my phone down on my desk and I sat very still for about 2 minutes looking out the window at nothing. And then I made a decision. Not an angry decision, not a dramatic one. It was the calmest decision I had ever made in my life. I said, okay, just okay, to myself quietly, and then I stopped. I didn't send the $600. I didn't call my mom. I didn't send an angry text explaining why. I didn't write a long message listing every single time they had dismissed me, every birthday they'd spent praising David, every dinner where I sat in silence and watched my brother get the spotlight. I didn't do any of that because that's not how I work. I don't explode. I stop. I stopped sending money. I stopped answering the requests. I stopped showing up to family dinners where I sat quietly and watched my brother get praised for achievements that were objectively a fraction of what I had already built. I didn't ghost them entirely. I still answered the phone sometimes. I still said hi, but the money stopped, and the showing up stopped, and the pretending stopped. My family predictably did not think I was serious. Sarah's probably just busy, my mom told my dad, according to a text she sent my brother that David accidentally forwarded to me. You know how she gets. They thought it would blow over. They thought I'd come back to the table quiet and compliant the way I always had because that's what I had always done. For years I had shown up. I had smiled. I had handed over money and asked for nothing. And they had come to rely on it without ever realizing it was something I was choosing to give. I had just chosen to stop. They were wrong to think it would blow over. June was when they first noticed something was off. My dad called about a car repair, $800 for brake pads and rotors on his sedan. He called me on a Saturday morning, cheerful, casual, the way he always sounded when he needed something. I let it ring. He called Mom. Mom called me. I let it ring again. 2 days later, Mom sent a text. Honey, Dad's car is making a terrible sound. Are you going to help with this? I read it. I typed nothing. I set my phone down and went for a run. The brake pads didn't get fixed for another week. Dad drove the car anyway, the grinding sound getting worse with every mile, the kind of sound that makes you wince every time you hit the brakes. When he finally took it in, he paid with a credit card that was already carrying a balance from a trip he and Mom had taken to see David for his birthday in March, a trip they hadn't invited me to. By July, the pattern was clear. Without my quiet, invisible contributions, the small financial cracks in my family's life started showing up one by one. Mom's credit card bill crept up $200 in a single month. Dad started complaining at dinner about how expensive groceries had gotten, as though the price of lettuce had changed overnight. David texted me once, casually asking if I could float him $1,000 for a car payment that was due early. He added a laughing emoji at the end as though the request was a joke. It wasn't. I didn't respond to that one either. Meanwhile, my life continued the way it always had. Meridian was in the middle of one of its biggest growth quarters. We had just closed a deal with a logistics company worth $4.2 million in annual recurring revenue. TechCrunch had mentioned us in a roundup article, the kind of mention that gets forwarded around the industry and sits in inboxes for weeks. I had 3 board members asking me to expand into the European market by the end of the year. My head of engineering, a woman named Rachel, who had been with me since the very beginning, sent me a message one Friday afternoon that simply said, "We just hit 500,000 active users." I printed that message out and taped it above my desk. I was busy. I was focused. And for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the invisible weight of being the family's quiet, unacknowledged piggy bank. It was in August that the Harwood contract came together. My head of partnerships, Janet Okafor, flagged it during our weekly strategy meeting. She was flipping through inbound inquiries on her tablet. "We get dozens every week now," and she stopped on one and looked up. "We've got an inbound inquiry from Harwood and Associates," she said, pulling up their profile on her laptop. "Mid-tier consulting firm, 43 employees. They're looking for a data management platform for their client-facing projects." I looked at the name on the screen, Harwood and Associates, my dad's company. I stared at it for about 3 seconds. The room was quiet. Janet was waiting for my input. 2 other team members were looking at me, waiting. Then I said, "Run the normal evaluation. If they meet our criteria, move forward." Janet nodded. She didn't know the connection. Nobody on my team did. I had never once mentioned my family to anyone at Meridian. Not my parents, not David, not the dinners, not the money, not the years of being invisible. It was a clean wall, and I had built it carefully, brick by brick, and I wanted to keep it that way. The evaluation took 2 weeks. Harwood qualified easily. The contract was drafted, terms were agreed upon, everything moved forward through the proper channels the way it always does. Nobody at Meridian thought twice about it. It was just another client, but I knew exactly what was coming. September 12th, a Tuesday. I got to Meridian's headquarters at 7:30 in the morning, the way I always do, through the side entrance, coffee in hand, earbuds in, a stack of emails already open on my phone. I had a full day. Product review at 9 o'clock, investor call at 11 o'clock, lunch with our CFO at 12:30, and then the afternoon was blocked off for the Harwood onboarding. The onboarding. That was the day Harwood was sending a small team to tour our headquarters, meet our key staff, and sign the final operational agreements in person. Janet had coordinated the schedule. A liaison named Greg Holston from Harwood was leading their delegation. I didn't know who else was coming. I hadn't asked. I didn't need to. At 2 p.m., I was in my office reviewing the product roadmap when Janet knocked on my doorframe. "The Harwood team just arrived in the lobby," she said. "Greg's downstairs with 2 others. Want me to have them brought up?" "Give them the standard tour first," I said. "I'll come down at 2:45. She nodded and disappeared. Downstairs in the main lobby of Meridian Tech headquarters, my father walked through the glass doors for the first time. I wasn't there to see it happen, but I heard about it later from Diana, our receptionist, who had been at the front desk for 3 years, and who had at some point in the last 12 months put together a scrapbook of every major moment in the company's history for an internal anniversary event. Diana notices things. She's the kind of person who remembers faces, remembers names, remembers the exact expression someone was wearing when they walked through the door. Diana told me this is what happened. Greg Holston walked in first, badge already clipped to his jacket from a previous visit to another vendor. He smiled at Diana, said, "Harwood delegation, we have at 2 o'clock, and she started pulling up their arrival forms on her computer. Behind him, 2 men walked in. One was a younger associate named Patrick, mid-20s, nose in his phone. The other was my dad. Robert Chin walked into that lobby and stopped. He stopped the way you stop when you walk into a room and something doesn't add up. Not dramatically, not like in a movie where someone gasps and staggers backward. He paused. His feet went still, his eyes moved. The lobby at Meridian is not ostentatious. We're not a tech company that spends $20 million on a foosball table and a slide between floors. It's clean. It's modern. White marble floors, warm wood accents. A long reception desk in brushed brass. On the left wall, floor-to-ceiling glass panels displaying our company timeline. The founding in 2017, the first product launch in 2018, the Series A in 2019, the Series B in 2021, the Forbes mention, the industry awards, the client milestones, each one dated, each one documented. And on the right wall, the main wall, the one you see the moment you walk through the doors, there is a single panel 8 feet wide, 12 feet tall. The Founder's Wall. It's not vanity, it's tradition in our industry. A way of anchoring a company's identity to the person who started it. Other tech companies do it too. Apple had Jobs, Google had Page and Brin, Meridian has me. My photo, a professional headshot, black and white, taken during a magazine shoot last spring, is centered on that panel. My name is printed beneath it in clean modern typography. And below my name, 4 words. Sarah Chin, founder and CEO, 12 feet high. My dad stood in that lobby and looked at that wall. Diana told me later that she watched his face go through something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't shock exactly. It was more like a slow recalculation, like someone had just shown him a math problem he'd been solving wrong for 30 years. And the correct answer was staring him in the face. Greg turned around. "Robert, you okay?" My dad didn't answer right away. He was still looking at the wall. "Robert." "That's," my dad started. He pointed at the photo, at my name. "That's my daughter." Greg blinked. He looked at the wall. He looked back at my dad. "Sarah Chin is your daughter?" My dad nodded. His hands, Diana told me, were shaking. Greg didn't know what to say. Confused, Diana behind the desk went very still. It was at that exact moment that Janet Okafor came down from the 3rd floor to greet the delegation. She walked into the lobby with her tablet, smile already in place, and stopped when she saw the look on everyone's faces. "Everything okay?" she asked. Greg pointed at my dad. "This is Robert Chin. He says he's Sarah's father." Janet looked at my dad. Then she looked at the wall. Then she looked back at him. "Oh," she said, "just that." There was a silence that lasted about 4 seconds. It felt longer. Janet recovered first. She's good at that, at reading a room and moving through it professionally, regardless of what's actually happening underneath. "Mr. Chin," she said, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure. Let's get you all set up." It was at that moment that Marcus Webb walked into the lobby. Marcus is Harwood's senior VP, my dad's boss. He had come to Meridian for the signing ceremony later that afternoon, arriving separately from the delegation. He walked in with his coat over one arm, phone in the other, and stopped when he saw the group clustered near the reception desk with their slightly stunned expressions. "Greg," he said, "everything going smoothly?" Greg hesitated. He looked at my dad, then back at Marcus. "Marcus, this is Robert Chin. He's on your team," and apparently Greg gestured at the wall at my name. 12 feet high. Marcus looked at the wall. Then he looked at my dad. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but a sharp and immediate recalculation. He knew my name. He had seen me speak at 2 industry events. He had read the same articles everyone else in that room had read. "Robert," Marcus said slowly, "Sarah Chin is your daughter?" My dad said nothing. He just stood there, looking smaller than I had ever seen him look. Marcus didn't push it. He's too professional for that. He just nodded once and said, "Well, small world." And then he turned to Greg and started talking about the signing documents. And the conversation moved on the way conversations do when everyone in the room is pretending something didn't just happen. But something had changed. The air in that lobby was different now. Greg, Patrick, Diana, Janet, Marcus, every single person standing in that room had just watched Robert Chin find out that the company his firm had signed a contract with was built by his own daughter. The daughter he called the tech thing at dinner. The tour continued. Greg led the Harwood team through the first floor, the open-plan workspace where 62 engineers sat coding, the glass-walled conference rooms, the wall of client logos that included 3 Fortune 500 companies. My dad walked through it all in silence, his eyes moving from one thing to the next, recalculating. At one point, they passed a monitor in the hallway that was displaying the company newsletter, an internal publication we send out every 2 weeks. The current issue had a photo of me at an industry event in San Francisco, shaking hands with the CEO of one of our biggest enterprise clients. The headline read, "Meridian closes record Q3. My dad stopped in front of that screen for a long time. Patrick asked if he was okay. My dad said he was fine. They made it to the second floor. Janet showed them the Partnership Operations Center, the team that would be handling the Harwood account day to day. She introduced Greg to the account managers. She walked them through the onboarding timeline, and then at 2:43 p.m., Janet's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, nodded, and said, "Sarah's available. Let me bring you up to meet her." The elevator ride to the 3rd floor was quiet. My dad stood in the back corner, arms crossed, jaw tight. Greg was making small talk about the building. Patrick was on his phone again. The doors opened. Janet led them down a short hallway, past the CFO's office, past the product team's bullpen, past a wall of framed press coverage, and stopped at a door with a frosted glass panel. On the panel, in simple black letters, Sarah Chin. Janet knocked twice and opened the door. I was standing by the window, coffee in hand, looking out at the city. I turned around when they walked in. I saw Greg first, then Patrick. Then I looked past them, and there was my dad, standing in the doorway of my office in my building, looking at me. The way you look at someone when you realize for the first time that you have been fundamentally wrong about them for a very long time. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him for about 3 seconds, and then I shifted into the same professional calm I use in every meeting. "Greg," I said, extending my hand. "Good to finally meet you in person. Janet's told me great things about the Harwood team." Greg shook my hand. "Miss Chin, the pleasure is ours. This is a beautiful operation you've built." "Thank you," I said. I looked at my dad again. He was standing slightly behind Greg, not quite able to look at me directly. His hands were at his sides now, but his fingers were doing something. Curling and uncurling slowly, the way they do when he's nervous. I'd seen that 1,000 times in my childhood. Before job interviews, before arguments with Mom, before anything. His hand made him feel small. "Dad," I said quietly, not for the room, just for him. He looked up. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. I let the silence sit for exactly 2 seconds. Then I turned back to Greg. "Janet, can you take Greg and Patrick through the final contract review on the 4th floor? I have another meeting at 3 o'clock, and I want to make sure we stay on schedule." "Of course," Janet said. She guided Greg and Patrick toward the door with practiced ease. As they filed out, I caught Greg's eye. "Greg, make sure Mr. Chin gets everything he needs. He's important to us." Greg nodded, confused but polite. Patrick didn't look up. My dad was the last one in the doorway. He stood there for a moment after the others had passed. "Sarah," he said. His voice was different, quieter than I'd heard it in years. I looked at him. I didn't walk toward him. I didn't close the distance. I just stood by my window in my office in the building I had built from nothing, and I let him see me. "We can talk this weekend," I said, "if you want to." He nodded once, and then he turned and walked out. My dad called me 23 times that evening. The first call came at 4:17 p.m., 15 minutes after he left the building. I let it ring. The second came at 4:22. I let that one ring too. By 5 o'clock, there were 7 missed calls and 3 voicemails. I didn't listen to the voicemails until later that night. Sitting on my thrift store couch in my one-bedroom apartment, a glass of water on the coffee table, the city quiet outside my window. The first voicemail was almost incoherent. My dad's voice was tight, strained, like he was trying to hold something together that kept wanting to fall apart. "Sarah, it's Dad. Call me back, babe, just call me back." The second one was quieter. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I mean, I knew you worked in tech, but I didn't." "Sarah, $340 million. Is that real? Call me." The third voicemail was the one that got me. His voice broke. Not dramatically. Not in a way he'd ever admit to if you asked him about it later, but it cracked right in the middle of a sentence the way it does when someone is trying very hard not to cry and failing just slightly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I think I've been really, really wrong about you for a long time, and I don't know what to say about that, so just call me, please." I listened to it twice. Then I put my phone down and sat in the quiet for a while. My mom called at 6:30. She'd found out from Dad, who had called her the moment he left the building. Mom was crying, real crying, not the performative kind. She left a voicemail that was mostly just her saying, "Oh, Sarah," over and over again. David found out at 8 p.m. He called once, didn't leave a message, and then texted, "Dad just told me, are you serious right now?" I didn't reply to that text. Not that night. The extended family learned about it over the next 48 hours. The way news travels in a family like ours, through phone calls, texts, and at least one post from my Aunt Karen that generated 17 comments in 2 hours. At Harwood, the impact was quieter but no less real. Marcus Webb, the senior VP who oversaw the Meridian account, pulled my dad aside the next morning. Marcus had met me twice before at industry events, once in Boston, once in Chicago. He knew exactly who I was and what Meridian was worth. "Robert," Marcus said, sitting across from him in his office, "why didn't you ever mention your daughter?" My dad didn't have an answer for that, or if he did, it wasn't one he wanted to say out loud. Marcus didn't make it uncomfortable. He's a professional. But from that point on, things at Harwood shifted in the way they always shift when someone discovers that one of their employees has been quietly connected to something significant that they didn't know about. It wasn't hostile. It was just aware. People looked at my dad differently, not with contempt, with a kind of curious reassessment. Greg Holston texted Janet the next day. "Quick question, is it normal for a client's family to show up during onboarding?" Asking for a friend. Janet laughed when she told me that one. David was the one who surprised me the most. He didn't call again for 3 days. Then on Friday evening, he sent me a long text. Not an apology exactly. David doesn't apologize easily, but something close to it, an acknowledgement. He wrote that he'd looked up Meridian online after Dad told him, and that he'd spent an hour reading about the company, and that he felt kind of like an idiot. His words, for never once asking me a real question about what I did. He ended the text with, "Dad's a mess. Mom's crying every 5 minutes. I think you should talk to them when you're ready, but not before, on your terms." I read that text standing in my kitchen at 9 p.m. on a Friday night, and it was the closest I came to crying through the whole thing. I didn't talk to my parents that weekend. Not because I was punishing them. I just wasn't ready. There was too much sitting in the space between us, too many years of quiet dismissal, too many dinners where I smiled and said nothing, too many times I'd handed over money and asked for nothing in return except to be seen. I needed to figure out what I actually wanted to say before I said it. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, my dad sent me a text. It was short, 4 sentences. "Sarah, I owe you an apology, a real one, not on the phone. Can we get coffee?" I read it sitting on my couch, the same spot where I'd listened to his voicemails. The morning light was coming through the window. My apartment was quiet. The Honda Civic was parked outside with its chipping bumper paint. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had. I read the text once more. Then I set my phone down and went to make breakfast. I didn't reply that day, not because I didn't want to, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't have to rush to give my family what they needed. I had built something real, something that 280 people showed up to every day. Something worth $340 million. Something that had taken me 8 years of silence and sacrifice to create. and it wasn't going anywhere. The coffee could wait until Monday,